we have begun recording. And before this, we were just having a conversation about how this is. We were kind of introing the idea to our special guest here. But I think it's a good place to begin with. Our special guest today, by the way, is Mr. Trevor Koverko. Hey, man. And this is another episode of NFT3's The Most Important Thing podcast. We've been rolling these out faster than usual, but there's a lot of activity, happening, good or bad. And I think it's going to be a fun conversation. So I liked the reason I started with that, Dylan, is I liked how you framed it. Is that everything returns in this ongoing conversation of ours to blockchain, but I think the way I would delineate it is that generally when you hear content around blockchain or crypto, it's either speculation based or technology based. And I think what we're doing is perhaps one of the only examples where it's more sociology based or philosophy based. It does obviously run the entire gamut of everything else, but kind of returns to why. And that I think is interesting. With that preamble, welcome to our next episode.
Yeah, indeed. We're not like just degenning, and talking about like the latest shitcoin here. Or
nerding out. Right?
Yeah. So, but I think it would be really cool for our audience, if they don't know who Trevor is already, like, I'm gonna just tell like a personal story about like my how I knew who Trevor was and how I just discovered who he was and and that will relate to maybe, if you don't mind, like giving a little bit of your background, Trev. But I knew about Trev, like, I guess way back, man, like right when you were first starting Polymath, was when I heard about you, and I was like, oh man, this guy's really like exciting, really cool, like, and used to be a hockey player, and then is now starting this the security kind of token situation. I was just really I was really curious and intrigued by you in the early days, and then as time went on, just so that viewers know, we ended up becoming associated. He advised a couple of projects, and we ended up becoming friends. But I just had a ton of admiration and respect for Trevor in the very early days. And I know he's been around for a long time, as I have. And I think it'd be awesome if you could maybe share like I would love to know how you first kind of got into it. Like, did you just see something on the internet? Did a friend tell you about Bitcoin? Because I think we're going back to, for you, 2011, 2012, way back, right?
Yeah, no, totally. And thanks for having me on, guys. And great to see you, Doug. For me, it was very organic. I was kind of nerding out on the internet and chat rooms and forums and Reddit and all these things. And Bitcoin started kind of surfacing up in 2010, 2011, 2012, especially. That's when I finally built up my courage to buy my first Bitcoin in late 2012. And it was really like hard back then to get Bitcoin unless you wanted to trade over the counter, like locally with someone on local Bitcoins, which I'm not even sure was around back then.
Wow.
So back in those days, one of the popular places to buy Bitcoin was actually eBay, of all places. And that's where I bought my first Bitcoin. And it was like obviously a complete train wreck of OPSEC around trusting someone to send you the Bitcoin after you send them the cash, and so on. But it worked. And I kind of held on to this day to that one Bitcoin with my fist clenched, because I was like, this is it was really, and it was the same with the Ethereum, because a few years later Ethereum came around, and I actually remember putting that exact Bitcoin from 2012 into the Ethereum crowd sale in 2016, I think it was. And it's kind of interesting because it was just a new way to kind of fund, it's kind of like Silicon Valley. You start a company, you get an exit, and you kind of take that capital and put it back into a new business, and you kind of get that thriving ecosystem. And with crypto, it was like that on steroids, because everybody who got in early on Bitcoin and Ethereum, wanted to seed the next round of projects, and that's actually how Polymath kind of came around too, is because it was recycled into Polymath, and just like a lot of the Ethereum guys, I was very lucky that Ethereum was co-founded in Toronto by Ethereum and 5 or 6 other guys, and so it was awesome because here's Ethereum, and then a few of the co-founders split off, and they went off to do exciting things, just like kind of the Silicon Valley model, and so and so guys like Charles Hoskinson, who was an Ethereum co-founder, went out to start Cardano, and guys like Joe Lubin went off to start Consensus, and guys like Gavin Wood went splintered off to start Polkadot. And it's not like there's a big drama divorce thing. There may have been, but it's more about we're launching something that's decentralized. We're putting governance in place like a DAO, and now we can move on to another project that we think needs to get solved. So it's a really interesting organic dynamic. A lot of the capital that was the wealth that was created, added a lot of fuel to that as well. But I think the products are really catching up to the early hype and the early capital, and I think we're at a better spot than ever, irrespective of the current market conditions.
Yeah, I totally agree. And I think something that I like definitely want to investigate or dig a little bit deeper with you is, in those early days, it was to form the conviction around actually putting your hard-earned money into what seemed at that time like magic internet money. I like, what was the conviction? Why were you so convinced? Why were you so convinced in those early days? Like what, and be honest, like maybe you were not totally convinced. You're like, why not? Right. Or was there a conviction?
Yeah, there's nothing wrong with that.
What was it?
Yeah, there was people from those days remember there was a long winter. I forget what cycle it was. It was like, there was a couple of them, but there was protracted, like nothing was going on. And we were all, hanging out with other early adopters and going to these conferences. There was one in San Jose, which was an early one, and the Ethereum one in Miami was very famous in 2016, I think. And everyone, that was it. Everyone was kind of like at home living in their parents' basements. And it was kind of a nice, pure time because everyone was there for the right reasons. Everyone was excited about the tech. No one was like making money at that time. That I can guarantee you. And what it kind of allowed you to do, especially as other people started succeeding and at least trying and launching things, and some things worked and some didn't, but it gave the rest of us the confidence to try our own project and say, you know what, this whole Web3, it wasn't called it back then, it's a whole universe of empty space that needs a lot of building to make it a reality. And that includes, all the layers of the stack, from the protocol layer to the infrastructure layer to the apps on top of the infrastructure that allows regular users to get in, and making it as invisible as possible in terms of the Web3 tech underneath it. And for me, it was the same kind of story. And I was kind of known as the guy, believe it or not, that was just kind of going to the events and hanging out and talking and being social, but like not really doing anything. And I remember a guy named Anthony kind of called me out on that. He's like, dude, it's time to like actually do something. I'm like, oh, I got these other things going on. And he's like, well, it might be time to dive into something. And he actually helped me refine the concept for the project that became Polymath, kind of my first full-time project in the Web3 space.
That's amazing. We actually share, I don't know if we talked about this before, but we kind of share that in common. I ended up reaching out to Anthony early on too, and tried to interview with him. And at that time they were trying to essentially do consulting services for large, like financial companies in the States. And I ended up interviewing with him, and he was like, send me a resume. And I don't know if I ended up sending him a resume or not, but because I was pretty afraid at that time. I had a corporate job, and I was like, I don't know if I can, just totally dive into this completely yet. But yeah,
to answer your question on because there's always kind of the why, like what made you interested in this space,
Right.
and everyone has different reasons. Some people it's exciting, some people it's where the growth or their friends are in. And I think for me, it was a combination of seeing a lot of really being on the pulse of technology. I whether it's blockchain, AI, whatever. I'm interested in cutting edge technology, but just seeing when I started seeing like really interesting, smart people that I respected immensely come into the space. So guys, I remember seeing the Ethereum guys doing a call with Naval Ravikant. This is like 2015 or something, like way back in the day. And I was like, you know what, that's cool. Like that's a lot of validation and just the principles too. Like it all comes back to kind of your mission and your principles in life. And I think the Bitcoin white paper, and I was very, Bitcoin maxi back in those days because there wasn't anything else. And it was like, what's the point of other projects? Like Bitcoin can do it all. And you can have colored coins. You can have, which was like the first version of NFTs. And technically you could, but it wasn't until Ethereum came around and they proposed this kind of virtual machine that allowed for a lot more expressive computation and smart contracts that really opened the world to what's possible. And now I think the non-Bitcoin part of crypto is exciting in a lot of ways too, even though Bitcoin itself is obviously still super exciting. So that was kind of the philosophical entrance into that, is just believing in Bitcoin and having decentralized money. That's what Bitcoin started at. It wasn't digital gold. It was a digital peer-to-peer cash system. That was the name of the white paper. And that really resonated with me, which is kind of like a sovereign computer science-based cryptographic money. And that really resonated with me. And a lot of the early users of Bitcoin kind of fell in that category. It was a lot of engineers and a lot of like philosophically aligned people in terms of kind of money and separating it from certain institutions and having it issued kind of by the people, which was super exciting for me.
Yeah, absolutely.
I love it.
Yeah, I mean, go ahead.
Oh, so sorry. I was just saying that while I was listening to the two of you kind of automatically run this podcast, and I'm going to step away and let this happen because it's great. I have much less work to do here than I thought. I've just realized that I'm going to call this one the veteran episode because to me, what's interesting is how similar the two of you are. Both early BTC adopters, early like dial-in entered Ethereum as well, and it seems you did as well. Maybe I should move to Toronto. That's another thing that I realized from what you guys were speaking about. But
a lot of people forget Toronto. Yeah, like just to jump in, sorry. Like a lot of people forget in the early days, Toronto was actually one of the biggest epicenters of activity for Bitcoin and blockchain. Right? Like Bitcoin Magazine was founded here, if I recall correctly. All the Ethereum team were all like not ex BTC guys, but they were all ensconced in the Bitcoin community that was here in Toronto. And so Toronto actually was like in the early days was very much ground zero for blockchain at large. So a lot of like I can't think in those days of a more active community than was active here in Toronto. Because even if you went on like Bitcoin Talk like back in the day, like every third person you'd talk to, you'd be like, "Oh yeah, I'm from Toronto," and it would be like, "Whoa." But anyway, sorry to interrupt.
No, yeah, we were center ice in the whole scene, like the number one place for a period of time. It wasn't very long, but
no, it's like a couple years.
I remember we had all the people that were kind of no names back then, but now they're stalwarts in the community, kind of the Gavins, the Joe Lubins, the Vitaliks, the Charles Hoskinsons. They were all in one room, like all in one place, working together on getting Ethereum launched. And it's a little unfortunate because Toronto definitely fell behind, and I feel like we kind of chased Vitalik out of the country or the province instead of just really trying to welcome him and keep him here. But it's all good. Crypto's a decentralized phenomenon, and look, a lot of other places have taken the torch for where a lot of the building is getting done, although it is extremely decentralized. But places like Silicon Valley are kind of taking over as the cluster for a lot of capital and smart people and projects to come out of, and that's okay. I think I think as time goes on, it's going to get even more fragmented and decentralized. And you're seeing a lot of the top projects were started, by a developer out of South Africa or Australia, like
Right.
I think Kane and Synthetics, and South Africa,
India. Like Polygon.
Sony, India, Polygon. It's unbelievable, and that's a beautiful thing, and it really speaks to the core values of Web3 as well. It's just having no central
I would venture to say that, if I was in your position, I'd be happy to see it actually happen. Although I understand the sort of hometown affection you have, but isn't this how success for this ideology, let us say, would look, right? Is that it actually spreads and we find builders all over the world. And I can only imagine, for both of you, really, how it must feel to look at it for 10 years turn into this massive, storm of a movement. And I know that right now, market wise, it's not the best time, but adoption wise, the Nike thing that just happened, they've already done a bunch in NFTs, but now, the new announcement. But just to back up for a second, because we were, I think, at a very interesting point where, Trevor shared his philosophical reasons for having gotten into Bitcoin. I love it. Decentralized, peer-to-peer cash system, computer science based. I absolutely get it. Dial in if you could give us the same perspective, because you joined at the same time, you were in the same scene. And I think by and large, even ideologically, both of you are very much aligned, but still would love to hear that story. How did you first go, hey, you know what, I got to do this?
It actually came from a little bit of desperation because I felt like if I can speak just super personally and vulnerably, I felt a little bit like underemployed, a little bit like dispossessed of, being able to claim what I felt was my power or like what I could do in the world. And I was in Toronto, like writing papers for students. So a little unethical, but whatever. And I was spending like 2 or 3 hours a night, like every night on the internet, similar to Trevor, actually, just like trying to figure out what was next. I was always consumed with like what was next and very sort of technologically oriented. And coming out of the 2008 financial crisis, I was very primed and attuned to like what could change, what could be the thing that could really change all of society, like at a global level. And so I had some sort of ideas about that in very early on, and I was like, "Oh, 3D printing might be the thing that changes society," But then I ended up eventually coming to the Bitcoin white paper, and I was like, "Oh!" And as I started to understand it more and more, and what it could mean, I started to really form conviction around this idea that if we were able to have value unfettered from national interests, like that would be really interesting. And I have a sociology background, so I was really quite interested in a lot of these issues, and so that was it essentially. And over time, I started to get more refined, more sophisticated in my understanding of all of the technology behind it. And like when Ethereum came, I remember the Bitcoin Talk announcement for Ethereum, and then I started looking into that. And then I think that was in 2014 the announcement came out from Vitalik on Bitcoin Talk. And then I was like, asked my uncle, who's a computer science professor, I was like, what is Turing completeness? And he's like, it's essentially like you have a full alphabet to, if you will, to model all these different logic statements. And I was like, oh, okay, that's interesting, right? So then I actually understood what programmable smart contracts meant and entailed, and what the implications were. And in those days, a lot of the Bitcoin community is like, why the fuck do we need programmable smart like, why would we need to have a programmable smart contract, or why would we need to be able to model logic statements like in something like Bitcoin does it all. We have the financial use case that works well for that. It's just funny to think that was the more dominant narrative back then. And now obviously we're here. But that was pretty much my experience in a nutshell. Yeah. I wanted to see the
Okay,
world
I
change.
think this is
I was bored.
yeah,
I felt like things were a little unfair and kind of like in a
right.
weird stasis.
Yeah, dude, I don't know. It's weird every time, even internally while working, every time we have a conversation that veers more to the sort of like personal or the philosophical, I feel so similar, It's almost shocking. But I think where you kind of brought us right now is an interesting thought that back then BTC maxis were the norm, and people were like, well, this is it. This is pretty much all we need, and this is how it's going to go, right? Let's fast forward to now
Yeah.
when it's very different. Obviously a shit ton of things happened. DeFi happened, NFTs happened, the metaverse is beginning to happen, so on and so forth. um and now pretty much everybody, let's also bring FTX into it in the sense that we do have a recency bias, right? And it's only been some time. So a lot of people are like, hey, I'm done with this whole cryptocurrency thing, and so on and so forth. uh but things grow. They don't stop. It's a lot like, I don't know, trees. Things have a momentum of their own, and naturally the ecosystem has become more and more sophisticated and grown as time goes on. Do you think it's even possible to not be blocked by the barriers of where your identity resides right now? In that I'm a BTC maxi, or now it's like I'm an ETH maxi, or I'm a DeFi person. So to me, the metaverse is just fun and games, and I'm not even, gonna try and understand that VR will come in and then what happens there, right? Do you guys think it's even possible for people to look beyond what they currently believe? And if they were, where do you think this goes? I think I know Dylan's answer, but I would love to hear from Trevor first.
Yeah, like it's a very tribal, cutthroat ecosystem, I guess. There's a lot of mud being slung on a daily basis and a lot of emotions. And there's two ways to look at that. I think on the one hand, it's unfortunate and there's a lot of infighting and we're losing sight of the bigger picture, and it's counterproductive, and it's like, well, it makes us look bad, blah, blah, blah. But the way I kind of think about it is it's actually kind of a positive signal. It shows that people are just very passionate and they care, and that's a lot better than just apathy or people that don't care enough to get involved. And the fact that people have their tribes, and as long as you keep it kind of constructive, or even not, like a lot of times you have communities kind of attacking other protocols and stress testing them, and that's actually healthy. It battle tests these protocols. It makes kind of this free market evolve quicker. I do think, though, can be counterproductive in a lot of ways, like in a kind of ridiculous, like, look at the internet. Like, are there people who are the tribe members of JavaScript versus Ruby on Rails versus PHP versus Python? It's like, kind of, but it's like, okay, they all exist. Like, it's all, this is better for this use case, that's better for that use case, and let's look at different ways to compile and bridge across. Like, it's very similar to, I think, what we're seeing in crypto. So I think there's a line here, but I wouldn't go as far to say that it's all negative and counterproductive. I think a lot of it is really healthy, and it shows again that people just care. They just want to dedicate their lives to this cause, whether that's the Solana ecosystem or whether that's the layer 2 people or whether it's the Ethereum people or Bitcoin maxis too. Like, like I said, I kind of went from that world early on when Ethereum was just coming out, not realizing technically how important it was to have a more expressive protocol, or I should say an expressive virtual machine on top of the protocol. And I think it's okay. Like the Bitcoin maxis, you see Vitalik talk about it a lot. Like, they're principled people, and they come in and kind of stomp around a little bit, but it's kind of healthy and needed as well. So I kind of like to see all these. I call it a flourishing ecosystem. If I had to sum it up in one word.
I agree. I mean, it's a demonstration of belief, which is in short supply in this day and age. I do think some piece of that, I know Dylan and I have had a conversation about this earlier. It dials back to tokens as well, because for the first time, people are being able to feel like they're a part of it, both in terms of part ownership, but also part governance. From a
Yep.
very very early time, which has generally always been gate kept, right? So I think that has a piece to do with it as well. But yeah, all in all, I absolutely agree. Some
So I think what you said
headbutting
about
will happen.
governance, the governance comments, I think a really good one you made, because it'd be nice if we could channel some of this like rhetoric against each other. And again, it's okay. It's, part of a healthy, open town square, but there's real work to do, not just building, but like participating. So like take that energy,
Right.
and I'd like to see more participation in DAOs and more people actually voting. It's the classic, in a stock, like 2% of people actually vote, because
Right,
everyone is
right.
just a passive income. But this we're not mature yet, so we need a lot of engagement, a lot of people directing these DAOs and these protocols, and a lot of people engaging more as well.
Yeah.
So I'd like to, if I'd had one comment, it's just kind of like translating a lot of that energy and channeling it towards the constructive, helpful things.
I agree.
Yeah, and I think that like because of the feature of these tokens where you are able to invest in them, it's different than say like investing like your time or your mind share into learning. There is some factionalism and like in developer communities of Ruby on Rails versus other programming language, JavaScript, blah blah blah. But the difference is with these tokenized systems is the tribalism ends up getting like amplified because you have literally put in presumably some of your value, some of your money, right? So that tribalism kind of becomes amplified because you want to see your horse win the race. And that can sometimes, I think that kind of amplifies the tribalism that we see in our I don't know, in our space, our industry.
Mm-hmm.
I think that you have to be open to, you have to approach all this stuff from like first principles. So what's the consensus mechanism that's being utilized? Why is it better than other consensus mechanisms that you see in the space? What is the underlying what are the underlying technological reasons why this is an important technology, whether we're talking about Polkadot, whether they're talking about Ethereum, Solana, Avalanche, whatever it is, and being open to the possibility that you may need to shift your focus to things that you find more important based on first principles or based on your knowledge of like real knowledge, not just because the token price is going bananas or something like that. So I think those are really important things to consider, and to maintain that openness and not to, not to like get too bullheaded about whatever ecosystem that
Right.
you are in, and to really approach it from those first principles, like why is it actually a good, L1, or why is it a good token, blah blah blah. So yeah, and
Yeah.
go ahead, Shash.
Uh, I just had a comment on what you said, is that I think there's a very, very thin and sharp line between skin in the game and incentives, in the sense that, for example, both of you, this is the perfect point to bring up, had conviction in BTC. So you actually put some of your own money into it, right? But like you mentioned, it's after an analysis, it's after a reasoned analysis that you get some skin in the game. The other opposite direction of that would be to be a bull market baby and see something pumping and buy into it with no reason, with no analysis, and now you're incentivized to just support it at all costs. Um, and so I think there's a very fine line, but in behavioral terms, there's actually a huge difference between these two sets of people. And one of the things that I've always been very fervent about, when it comes to like marketing in Web3, is we must attract the first kind of people who are, at least bothered enough to read about the technology. It's a lot like I hate to mention him because I think he's over mentioned whenever investing is concerned, but it's a lot like Warren Buffett's principles, where you have to understand what business it is you're buying into, because you're not buying a symbol, you are literally buying a piece of a business. But I think that difficulty of that analysis is only more amplified here because it's the edge of technology, and it takes quite a bit of mental bandwidth to research this stuff the way it should be before you go and get that skin in the game. And I think a lot of the blowback, so-called, that crypto receives, is from investors who are not investors but are openly speculators. And when things don't go well in the short term, they just get, it's a brittle space.
Yeah.
Not to sort of like point fingers, I understand it absolutely, but I still do think that this conversation needs to be had. Is that okay, you bought the token, but did you read about it? How much did you read about it exactly? And like how Dylan put it, like on a very basic first principles level, why do you think it's better than the others, and why should it exist, and so on and so forth. So I think absolutely agree with what you said. I just wanted to build on it a little bit, in the sense that it's easy to fool ourselves. It's easy to tell ourselves we did the first thing when in fact we did the second.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And I would say too, um, it's kind of a matter of what's needed right now in the space. And if I could sum it up, there's a lot of, we got ahead of our ski tips where there's a lot of, and this is very healthy and validating this whole space, but we had a lot of people rush in to use crypto how they want to. And for better or worse, the first kind of batch of real product market fit is trading. It's a trading casino. And again, that's not necessarily a bad thing. There's always kind of an adoption cycle and things change over time. But I use the example of Netflix actually, where there was clearly always a lot of demand for being able to magically stream content wherever you want, whenever you want, from however you want. But the infrastructure to support streaming from millions of devices globally just didn't exist. So the smart money back then, before the real consumer explosion of things like Netflix and Facebook and Uber, is the infrastructure building phase of the internet. And you can't have like 1080p streaming Netflix movies unless you have all the infrastructure that can support the bandwidth and the rendering and everything in real time and the devices that do it. So I think kind of phase one of crypto is kind of the Wild West. A lot of exchanges being the best place to invest in the equity of exchanges, like exchange tokens and stable coins, etc. I would actually separate stable coins because those are super interesting. But and then we have kind of V1 of low fidelity NFTs and V1 of low fidelity Web3 gaming and V1 of low fidelity DeFi. And I think if you look at where the smart money is, kind of like the Silicon Valley venture capital money is kind of centering in on the infrastructure that's needed to be built around roll-ups, around companies like Starkware doing interesting things and zero knowledge stuff. And I think we're still like in the middle of that phase of like the inning 2 of this infrastructure phase. So I think that's where a lot of, if I could wave my magic wand, a lot of the smart talent and engineers would be still kind of laser focused in on building the infrastructure that's going to enable the next phase of decentralized Netflix and decentralized Uber and decentralized dApps, so to speak. But clearly we're not there. Like we can't support, 1/1000th of the Visa network for payments. We can't support 1/1000th of the AWS throughput network capacity. So I think that's really, again, it's kind of think about it in a time scale. Like if you look at the internet, there was the same thing. There was the protocol phase when TCP/IP was unveiled, and that was kind of a ghost desert for a while, but eventually that got kind of solidified and ossified, and it is what it is to this day, which is kind of how protocols should be. And then the infrastructure layer came in the 80s and 90s, and that was about like building the pipes and the modems and the hardware that was needed as step 2, and it has to go sequentially. You can't do the infrastructure without the protocol, and you can't do the applications without the infrastructure. And so a lot of the smart money, if you're an investor, if you're an entrepreneur, like you'd want to be starting those types of businesses in the 80s and 90s, because that's, you could go and try to start Netflix in 1994, but it just wouldn't work and it would just be too early. And I still see a lot of that in Web3. There's a lot of people that are building stuff that's probably just too early. Like we're probably not ready for these full-blown consumer mass adoption decentralized applications because the networks just can't support it, and it's not secure enough, it's not safe enough. That's another big problem, is like where's the auditing, where's the backups, where's the ease of use so people don't lose their keys, where's the bridge security so we don't have like wormhole 1.0, 2.0, 3.0 every week. And so this is the stuff that the messy kind of hard, if we're building a house, the analogy is like we're building the foundation, and then we're building the scaffolding, and then and only then can you put the furniture in. There's no point in buying furniture right now because the friggin' pipes and the plumbing isn't done yet. So I think it's important just to take a breath and say, hey, I remember even back in 2017, people were building in 2017 on the timeline, they were building consumer stuff that's like 15 years away from being ready to be supported. Even Polymath, when I launched it in 2018, it was early. It was just really early, and I wouldn't have done anything differently because it's been a great learning experience. But we're still, forget about the technical infrastructure. There's like the legal infrastructure that also has to be clarified and built out and kind of understood across the ecosystem. So finding that next kind of chapter and where we're at, I think is kind of helpful, especially for new entrepreneurs and investors on where to spend time. Now, this bear market is a perfect, absolutely stellar time to be launching an infrastructure company because talent is a lot more accessible and more affordable, and there's just less noise. You can acquire customers more cheaply and stand out a lot more easily. So that's what I'm excited about, is just kind of remaining laser focused on this infrastructure layer. Anything outside, it's probably getting a little too late for new protocols ish, because that's kind of being cleared. There's kind of the network effects and winner take all kind of dynamics a bit with Ethereum or winner take most and a few other chains. There's obviously going to be new layer one protocols that come out and new innovations there. But I think we're kind of in transitioning from, if it's protocol to infrastructure to application, we're kind of like in the middle of between protocol and infrastructure. So that means, again, if you look at what Sequoia investing in, what J16Z investing in, everything, but I think they're mostly focused on kind of the Starkwares and the Polygons and the infrastructure side. So that's kind of my long rant on where we're at, I think, in the adoption cycle of the technology.
Yeah,
no, I actually love it.
I think
so sorry.
In 2021, we saw pretty much like a rehashing of a lot of the product market fit tries from 2017. So there are a lot of like if for all of the many of the ICOs are sort of like rehashed into 2021, but now with like all these L1s coming out. So I think that's pretty interesting. I'm wondering if you guys agree with this statement, which is Web3 crypto blockchain having its sort of like 1999.com like pets.com moment. And I'll give you my answer, which is that I think yes. I think that's like squarely where we are if we had to make a historical analogy, because it was almost like in 1999 it was like almost like, oh, we're almost there, but the stuff like you say, Trev, like the infrastructure was not there to support a lot of those ideas, and some of those ideas were not great, but some of them were right on the money, but the infrastructure wasn't there. So I want to hear what you guys think about that. Shash, maybe you go ahead.
I think you're absolutely right. I think firstly, I did one of the thing I was trying to say right after Trev was I love the phrase, and I'm gonna make an article about this as well when we put it out. That Web3 is in its plumbing phase. That's fantastic. We're building out the plumbing. I love that. And the other thing was that it wasn't a rant, Trev. You really just validated everything we're doing at NFT3. So thanks for that.
Yeah.
But yeah, is it that exact moment of overt euphoria without having entirely understood even the basic technicalities of what you're building on supposedly? I think that's exactly where we're at. I can't speak to that time too much because I'm, like a noob or whatever, but I can sense this almost urge for everybody to suddenly become a web3 founder. And while that's beautiful, and I've obviously, given approximately 3 years of my life to this thing, which is a lot in crypto time, right? So I'm happy to see it, but it does make me a little worried that it's like a head rush. They're not researching enough. They're not realizing, like you said, Trevor, that dApps are not even, you know worth the time yet. Not to say that all of them won't exist in the future, but to get some historical context. That's why I think conversations like this are important. Like for somebody like me, right? I learned before we started recording, right? I was just asking Trevor, like, I can't imagine how it was for you when you saw the first crash, because this is my first crash. So for you guys, it's weird, right? You've seen like three, but for me, it's like just understanding each of these pieces that have grown and what they've allowed for to be grown later on, to be able to place yourself and then dive in, hopefully, on something that you genuinely have conviction on because you studied all of those pieces. And I think what Dylan was mentioning was that that's not what was happening. What was happening was we'll .com anything, right? And I do think by and large it's a little harsh to say, but people want to web3 everything right away. And I don't think that's the way forward. And you know just to even bring up FTX because it's on everybody's mind, right? The big problem there again is that, well, not just the UI UX piece for Dexes was not sophisticated enough to get the very, very lay people onto, DeFi straight away. And
It's funny
so a
when you say
centralized,
that. I'm just like thinking back to Ether Delta days, and I'm like, man, it's amazing now, like compared to like 2018 trying Ether
yes, but
Delta.
but but
But
but,
yeah,
but you're like a super early adopter. Think
yeah,
about, basically you need it to be like I don't know, Tinder or whatever. The point I'm making is because the UX layer is not that good, right? Because I have to make a wallet before I can sign into any dApp, right? The Web2 person is still having to rely on trust in a centralized exchange because that's UI UX they understand.
mm.
And the trouble here, I think personally, is that um, Web3 people somewhere took their eye off of the ball when it came to decentralization. Like, I think this is a classic case of realizing this is why we need that shit. It's necessary. It's not a narrative. You can't do away with it. You can trust somebody and they can become very, very big. And then the meltdown happens. And now the tragedy to me is that people who are not within Web3 see this as a failure of cryptocurrencies, whereas what it is a failure of that one piece that you left centralized. You
Oh
know,
yeah, I mean, I
but
totally agree. I think one of the biggest factors in the current downfall of today of the narrative of crypto and Web3 is the number of like, I call them non-crypto native people. Typically they're like finance quant types coming into crypto 3 years ago, right? They have no regard for the philosophical orientation of the space. And if you listen to and this is why I never got into FTX or into Sam Bankman-Fried's, because I read early articles where he was like, I don't give a shit about crypto. I actually give a shit about like ethical altruism, and crypto is just a vehicle for my ethical altruism, which I didn't buy, that much, but whatever, I'll believe him because I feel like the essential piece here is like it's not just about, sure, I mean, making money is great and that's how people adopt things, and there's a lot of speculative impulse and people coming into the space. I mean, it includes me and probably includes Trevor and includes you, but once you come into the space and you learn more about it, like the actual ultimate aim is we're trying to deliver a few more points in the dynamic of the general dynamic of an individual living in society and how much rent-seeking behavior is taken on my value, right? And so whether that's rent-seeking behavior in the form of platforms and shareholders in Web 2 versus in Web 3 we've got communities and ecosystems, then fine. But the point is we're ultimately trying to deliver more value through more efficiency, through a better system, and that system indeed is decentralized. We try to keep these podcasts under 45 minutes. This has gone a little bit over time, which is cool, because we have such an esteemed guest. But I think we should probably tie this off a little bit if you like. And Trevor, would you like to have one of the last words here?
Yeah, no, thanks guys. I guess the parting word for me is just like, my biggest skill right now is taking a bear market and being excited about it. And it really just feels needed. It feels right. Like, it's the hangover, it's the crash. Like the hangover, it feels like shit, but it's important. It's healthy. Your body's actually like getting rid of all the crap and flushing it out and recalibrating to it. So I think we should embrace the hangover. I even just like now it's just cleaning up, like tactically, your own personal portfolios. I'm sure there's a lot of frothy stuff everyone was doing in the bull market a little bit, and not just us, like the regular crypto degen guys, like the big friggin' statured venture funds and the biggest funds in the world were just pissing money away at garbage. And so, you know what, it happens, and you can't beat yourself up about it. You got to look ahead and you got to survive. You got to stay in the game. You got to survive. That's the key takeaway, because if you don't survive, you're dead, and you can't enjoy the next run. So just like stay alive, stay default alive. Don't go bankrupt. Don't do a Celsius. Just stay alive. Even if you only have one chip left, you're still in the game. And then take this time to kind of to clean up, but still be aggressive. All the smart people are seeing this opportunity. They're more excited than ever. And by the way, this is a rare bear market where there's still a lot of capital on the sidelines. Like I remember the early crypto bear markets, there was nothing at all. You had to bootstrap everything. But now there's tons of dry powder. These funds have raised literally tens of billions of dollars, and their mandate is to deploy it. So I would say it's never been a better time for investors and builders right now. The funds that start now are this vintage from now until 2032 are gonna have the best performances because the entry points are so much lower. So that's my parting word.
That's great. I think that'll probably be our quote for the podcast. We do a quote for every podcast, and I think the quote should be "Embrace the hangover."
Yeah, embrace the hangover for sure. This is the best bear market.
I can speak confidently about that. I can speak confidently about that topic.
So. Thanks so much for your time, Trevor, as well as Dewdney.
Thank you.
This was fantastic. I personally learned a lot, and I'm hoping everybody enjoys this episode as usual. And
thanks, guys. Really enjoyed it.
Soon.
Our pleasure. We'll have you back on in a quarter or so.
Exactly.
Thanks, guys.
Let's do it.
Cheers. Bye-bye.
Cheers.